Hello, MedTech Insights enthusiasts. This is Dr. Jennifer Joe with my co-host, the fabulous Dr. Ami Bhatt. When Dr. Bhatt isn't hosting the show, she's running the Massachusetts General Hospital telecardiology program, seeing congenital heart disease patients and teaching at the Harvard Medical School. She is on you are actively in the hospital seeing patients right now. It's a little chaotic, so glad that you're here with us, Dr. Bhatt, and hoping that one of your fellows or residents maybe we'll do a cameo.
Not fellows and residents today, but nurse practitioners who I am so grateful to work with, and nurses. So
they are fantastic.
Different floor and a really great team.
When I'm not hosting the show, I see patients at the VA hospital in the emergency room, urgent care, and hospitalist settings. We both support and consult with traditional med tech and up-and-coming digital health startups. We both believe that healthcare can be better, both for clinicians and for the patients. When we're not here, you can see us giving local, national, and international talks. And we also have a fun Springer textbook, which I'm hoping to set aside some time so that we can talk about a little bit more in terms of themes from the textbook and how they relate. I'm going to take a little pause here and say, Dr. Bhatt, do you have any talks coming up that our audience should be aware of?
Yeah, we have one this afternoon, actually. So from 1 to 2:30. The Consumer Technology Association actually has a data standards meeting that we're going to do. I will try and find the link while we're chatting and have it for Jen to put up.
Data standards. You're gonna have to puff that up a little bit because that sounds really boring.
No, yes, it's super interesting. So interestingly, as we talk to one of our first guests, Miruna Sasu today, everybody's going to get to learn a little bit about what data standards are, because one of the things we think about is there is all this data. We want to use it. We want to use it to improve healthcare. But you can't just go out there, take stuff, and start to make conclusions based on it. You need to think about what the data is, where it came from, whether that data is biased, how you're going to look at it, and how you're going to apply it. And so there's actually a lot that goes into it. So that's the conference that we have this afternoon. Very excited for it. And we will put up a link. I should have thought of that in advance. And then we have the Consumer Electronics Show coming up around the corner in January. It is January, I think, 5th through 8th, I want to say, in Las Vegas. We're hoping Omicron stays away. There's going to be a lot of testing, but I think it's going to be a really great conference, both for the self-driving cars and also for the digital health. You got to give a shout out to self-driving cars.
That'll be fun. We could look for Dr. Bhatt as she's doing some wearable testing while in a self-driving car.
There you go.
As a reminder, MedTech Insights is live and weekly interactive talk show. We interview 2 guests. We have 2 guests today. We are Tuesday at 12 noon. We love to hear from our audience members. So if you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, there's that little chat piece. If you could go ahead and write the chat who you are, where you're watching from, what you're working on, and any questions for the guests that we have, or even any questions for me and Dr. Bhatt, put that in the chat and we'll actually display them on the screen and answer your questions. All shows are recorded and available after the fact on our website, Vanguard.Health /MedTech Insights. You can join our mailing list. And as a reminder, we're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So, Ami, over to you.
Absolutely. So I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving weekend. As Jen mentioned, I was fortunate to be able to be on call, taking care of patients in the hospital over Thanksgiving, which is one of my favorite times, actually, because it's a really great sense of togetherness and a great opportunity to be with people who can't be with their families. So a lot of kind of self-thought and centering that happened this weekend. So hopefully you guys are all feeling the same way and grateful. Grateful for our 2 guests today. It's going to be a great discussion. So we'll bring them on one at a time today. First, we have Maruna Sasu. She's a PhD MBA, and she currently serves as the Chief Strategy Officer at COTA Healthcare. It's an innovative oncology real-world data and solutions company. So she's actually known for developing real-world data and technology companies. She's done this before with a deep focus in understanding life science value drivers, aiming to advance complex objectives, and really driving improved outcomes for patients. Importantly, one of the things she's focused on and written on is also building the teams of people that you need to be able to take real-world data and make it meaningful. And this really brings together a whole group of different types of scientists, not just healthcare scientists or clinicians. And so looking forward to hearing from her about that. So why don't we bring on Miruna Sasu? Miruna, great to have you with us today. Thank you for joining us. Will you remind me, where are you joining us from?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm actually in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, which happens to be a little cold today.
Oh. that in Boston both, my friend. That in Boston both. This is when all of us are hoping we lived in Florida, but alas. So Miruna, your current job is Chief Strategy Officer, but will you, for our audience, tell them a little bit about where you came from and how you kind of got to this point? Because you've had quite varied experiences leading to this most recent position.
I'd be happy to. Thanks so much. Yes, so I actually joined COTA about 6 months ago. I was at Johnson & Johnson. I was the head of clinical trial feasibility and advanced analytics, where I spent a lot of time building data science capabilities and analytics capabilities to understand clinical trial patients and bring them into clinical trials at the point of care where they could most benefit from them. In addition to that, so prior to my world at Johnson & Johnson, I was with Bristol-Myers Squibb, where I focused specifically within oncology. And there I was the head of digital health and innovation for the company, where we brought companies like COTA and other companies in the real world data space, innovative technologies to help with drug development across the whole continuum and the whole process of drug development, from molecule discovery to clinical trials, and then all the way to sort of accessing those medicines within the United States as well as the whole world. So that's my recent past. I've spent most of my time in life science, and now I'm happy to say I'm in the world of smaller companies like COTA that really deal with and make sense of data and utilize technology, AI, machine learning to not only extract but also analyze data for the benefit of patients.
That's fantastic. I love the concept of you being at Bristol-Myers Squibb and Johnson & Johnson and bringing that knowledge and that experience, right? Because that's really real world experience of trying to see how the data can help you in real time with trials, with drug discovery, and now coming to a place like COTA with that. Will you, for the sake of our audience, because we do have, I'm looking at who's out there, some clinicians, some investors, and so people who maybe don't do.
And speaking of our audience, we would like to just say thank you to our audience for watching. And very delighted to have Dr. Borby tuning in from Colorado, working on commercial strategy. She said that data and understanding data and structuring it and cleaning it and labeling it we're going to talk about how this is fun. It's right up her alley.
so with that, we have more. Sorry.
Everyone's super excited about this. We have Noordine Bakari watching from Waterloo, Ontario, so Canada. And he is working on a data-driven preventative care platform. So I'm sure he's very excited about data as well. Sorry.
No, this is perfect. So those are our data people. For our non-data people in the audience, perhaps like Dr. Joe, could you tell us a little bit about the Bristol-Myers Squibb experience first, perhaps? And just when you say things like you are using large data to think about how to bring new molecules, right? Or thinking about it in terms of drug delivery, drug discovery. Will you give some real life examples of what that looked like, just so that our audience can kind of understand where we're coming from?
Absolutely. I would be delighted to. This is something that started probably a decade ago. And I'll just give you some examples from my Bristol-Myers Squibb experience. And then I'll also tell you about my J&J experience just recently, even with COVID. So at Bristol-Myers Squibb, there was sort of a revolution there. And they said, our leadership at the time said, we want to bring in ways to utilize real world data and other data, clinical trial data as well, to lessen the burden to the patients that we have, especially in the oncology space. So what would you think about first is let's digitize everything, right? Let's make everything digital so that people can have access to data points and knowledge at the click of a button potentially. Well, the first thing we needed to do to make that accessible, because everybody's head goes to, let's make technologies to do this, right?
Mhm.
Well, you can't actually make any technologies without having the data structured and in the right place to place those technologies on top of, so you can actually see what's happening, right? So we realized that very, very quickly, and we started working with companies like COTA to be able to structure electronic medical records and to take the insights out of the doctor's notes and place them in structured fields, so that when we made these technologies that are now available everywhere, and are being made even better every day, so that when we utilize those, we actually had data sets to sit on top of, so that we could see these insights real time. So now there are companies out there that have these large data sets that have structured information in them, de-identified, which is really good. Privacy is really key. De-identified, structured databases that you can tap into to understand patient populations on all levels. And so one example of this that is used in drug development is, well, so these data sets, for example, in drug discovery, when they're looking to figure out what molecules to come up with next that will be efficient for and efficacious for a patient population that perhaps doesn't have any other alternatives, right? So they're looking for molecules to pull from a molecule bank and make sure that those molecules are going to work. Right. So you have to look at, what do those patients look like currently? What are the characteristics of their disease? And how does that disease manifest? We call that the patient's journey. Well, you can actually do that in electronic medical records. You can do that in these databases and look at cohorts of patients and look at their characteristics, so that you can say, this patient, for example, had this biomarker show up in a recent biopsy and so on and so forth. And they might benefit from this type of molecule that really could change the trajectory of their disease, add more time, add better outcomes for the patient. And so that's just a real-time example in the very early stage when we're sort of picking out molecules.
That's great. I have to say, just to those who don't work with an electronic medical record on a regular basis, I know you've heard us perhaps lament, electronic medical records, but the wealth of data that's in there is considerable. However, the process of taking, let's say, the 17 notes I write today and making meaningful conjectures about how these people may respond to a new drug, that seems completely foreign to the average clinician who's trying to get through their day, right? And so we would hope that we could see every time, hey, you have this, and there is this drug that's perfect. But hey, you have this, there are hundreds of thousands of biomarkers people could have. And then there are equally a great number of potential either molecules or drugs that could be used, or foods, right? Food is, there's so many different things we could use that the human brain is probably not capable of doing that on a regular basis in the clinic. And that's why something like this is such an opportunity for us to provide really more personalized care for each of these patients. So just to those who don't do this regularly, this is immense. And it sounds like a relatively simple thing to do. It's really actually quite hard. It requires very bright people like Miruna to get this done.
I am just going to underscore that. I really love, Dr. Bhatt, how you brought that to us understanding what it means for patients. And I talk about data because I am the chair of the Mass Medical Society IT committee, and all we do is talk about bad data and cleaning up data and tagging data and moving data. And then so I get a little tired of it. But Mass Medical Society IT committee, we do great work.
Yes, you do.
But I am going to underscore, I was just out to dinner with one of the partners of OrbiMed, who does some of the biggest investments in in biotech and life sciences. And he was just saying, and he's a physician as well, that the biggest problem that we're seeing right now is data scientists, or people who are outside of healthcare, not understanding how much cleanup needs to happen to the data, how much of the appropriate tagging needs to happen with the data to actually do meaningful artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, and the such. So Maruna is really giving us this.
That's great. Maybe this is a good time for us to go ahead and actually bring out our next guest as well, because I see him nodding vigorously in the background. So why don't we have Doug Vincent join the conversation? So Doug Vincent is the CEO of VENTRIFLO. He's been working in medical devices since going to work for Dean Kamen after graduating from MIT in 1989. Today, he's a co-founder and CEO of VENTRIFLO, which is a blood pumping company dedicated to improving the world of open heart surgery. And the initial application for this platform technology is in pediatric cardiopulmonary bypass, the key of which is the concept delivering blood flow the way it should be, meaning kind of like with a lifelike pulse that the native heart provides rather than a continuous flow.
That is so fascinating. I've
really
never heard of that.
And I love that you think it's fascinating and you're not at heart a pediatric cardiologist. Like
I understand how the heart pumps.
So why don't we bring out Doug Vincent? Doug, so excited to have you with us. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks. Delighted to be here. Always a good podcast. And I'm a little bit maybe out of the general audience. We're working on things hardware, and hardware, of course, is hard. We worked with Bose to essentially take a speaker and turn it into a blood pump. Where the longstanding goal of recreating the native heartbeat in order to offer better perfusion or blood flow deep within the body, in the kidney, lung, brain, and gut. So I'm trained as a mechanical engineer. I think of myself as a simple mechanical engineer, but this is very complex stuff, doing all the flow in half the time, which is, of course, how we blood started flowing in all of us in the womb.
That's right. So, Doug, I'm going to have you, because you and I can chat about this, but I'm going to have you start a little bit at the beginning for our audience. And will you just tell them a little bit about why VENTRIFLO? What was the question that you guys wanted to be able to answer? What is the problem? Why is pediatric cardiopulmonary bypass not ideal? And what are we solving for a little bit? And then we can get into some more discussions.
You bet. Thanks for reeling me back in. So these are sick kids that have congenital heart issues. It's not from eating a lifetime of cheeseburgers or whatever, that this is the fate that they were handed. And often many of these kids will have multiple surgeries before they're 18 years old. When you're on a modern day heart-lung machine, unlike as we're sitting here now with a native pulse, which we equate with life, the flow is essentially continuous. And the downsides of this flat line flow is about 20 to 30% of capillary beds deep within the body drop out, that the red cells stop folding up and going through to deliver their oxygen and pick up the CO2, drop off their energy and move the metabolic wastes around the body. It seems that after the native heart comes back online, after the rigors of standard continuous flow, it takes 24 to 48 hours for these capillary beds to fully reopen. And the downside of having 20 to 30% of your capillary beds out of service, it's like a third of your body holding a breath for however long you're on the heart-lung machine.
Yeah. So just for perspective for those who are out there, so capillary beds are those areas that get closest right into the organs, right into the areas. And so we're saying those tiny, tiny areas where you really want to get to the heart of each organ and be able to perfuse it. Those are the areas that are holding back a little bit. And that's where we want to be able to get pulsatile flow to go to. So I think we have a question from the audience. And then, Doug, I have a question from you. Jen, do you want to pull that one up?
Yes. So we have a great question from Dr. Borby, who's saying, as a former clinician, the randomized controlled trials have been the gold standard. So she's curious it's true. This is really what we needed. This is an important topic. If the guest could speak to the issues and challenges of bridging this gap of randomized controlled trials, and I guess we're talking about real world evidence and how we utilize that and how we move that forward.
Yeah, actually, I'm happy to start if that's okay. I'm actually quite passionate about this particular item. This topic is one that I was trying to tackle in my role at Johnson & Johnson, and I'm glad to say successfully so on several occasions. One of the things I was going to tell you about today is the role of real-world data in the COVID-19 vaccine at Johnson & Johnson. So I mentioned to you, COTA is a real-world data company. We focus on oncology, but there's a real need for real-world data that looks a lot like what COTA provides nowadays in other therapeutic areas like, cardiology, infectious disease, and so on and so forth. But this question about randomized controlled trials versus real world data, there is absolutely a good way to bridge this gap. And that is, I would say that this actually reduces burden on the patients on the randomized controlled trials. So especially in other therapeutic areas than oncology, one of the things we did within COVID-19 and the vaccine that was developed at Johnson & Johnson is we utilized real-world data to not only understand the patient populations that were most in need, but also to bring in the trial patients on COVID-19 trials. And so the way that's typically done, and it's done quite well and quite across the board in oncology now, is we look to create what I would say is our hybrid or sort of synthetic control arms. Control arms meaning that those arms that are typically in oncology on standard of care can now be received and actually looked at in a database. So you no longer have to enroll patients that are just on standard of care necessarily. You can actually look in a database, create a cohort that looks relatively relevant to that clinical trial, and only enroll patients that can be on that treatment arm. So it's actually a reality. It's happening now. Many of them have been submitted. I'm happy to have to say that I've been privileged enough to be one of the first people to see this in action way back when it was happening. And it's something that we need to do more of. This is a real a very, very real and very valuable use case so that we can get these drugs to the patients that need them faster. And this can be done already in databases that exist.
These are two really good points, and I'm interested to see what Doug thinks next, but I'll just kind of reiterate. So one issue with randomized controlled trials is you really are taking people and you're saying you're going to get the new thing and then the other is not, right? You're going to get a placebo. And there are cases in which that doesn't seem right. Having said that, there are also times where you say, well, we are going to get the best medical care that exists right now, and the other person's going to get a somewhat newer medical care. However, if we have patients who are very heterogeneous, different from one another, right? If we have diseases that are relatively rare, if we have diseases that are changing before our eyes rapidly, as has been happening over the past 3 years, across the globe, those are situations where the number of patients that you would need to get just can't be achieved in the amount of time where we could actually do good things for patients. And that's part of the goal of being able to have trials where you can recruit from a database, if you will, for a comparator and be able to make a meaningful statement about whatever your new drug might be, your new mechanism, your new policy. And so I think that's, those are really three very important things: rapidly changing diseases, rare diseases where you don't have enough patients, or really heterogeneous populations where you need a significant number. And that slows down our process of discovery and making our patients better at times where we need them. Doug, for you, randomized controlled trial sounds like quite a challenge if you're going to put blood pumps into kids, right? So this is something that with hardware, I don't even know how you begin to kind of address this, but would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but let me, I think, start with whether you're a practicing clinician or in and around, the health tech industry. The goal is ultimately to provide better care for patients, either by augmenting clinicians or directly to patients themselves. But the challenge that the tension that's baked in, whether it's a randomized clinical trial or real world data, is if you want to practice standard of care evidence-based medicine, that means somebody else, somewhere else, innovated and captured that data and brought that learning back to you. And so there's this huge baked in tension, whether the tool of randomized clinical trial or the tool of real world data or whatever, how you figure that out. If you want to innovate, you have to do new things that have never been done before. And unfortunately, that's risky. So how to do that responsibly, and that's really, to me, the nub of the conversation, whether it's our technology for bringing pulsatile blood flow to where there hasn't been, although it's always been wanted, or an oncology drug or so forth, is how you manage responsibly that tension for the individual as well as for the future patient population. It's so hard to do. So I don't have a great answer in that. It's the struggle with, you're looking for funding. It's a chicken and egg thing. Hey, we want positive human data. We want a cleared device. We want you to have $20 million in annualized sales. That's when we get interested, some strategic or some particular large VC. And that's great. When you say to them, okay, how do we get the funding to get to that? They're like, oh man, that is hard. That's why we don't do that. And I get it, because it is hard. So, that's right. That's the nub of so many of these conversations, whether it's randomized clinical trials or real world data, is how you balance practicing evidence-based medicine, which means what? History. Mm-hmm. Or you innovate, which means doing something risky that's never been done before, but doing it in a responsible way. So I think, the FDA, by the way, I generally think has come back to having a much healthier balance on how to do that than maybe many, many years ago. And certainly many, many years ago, I think it was much better. So I'll stop there, but that's what I see. That's how I frame the problem.
I love the way you frame that, because it's true. We need both, and we need to figure out when we're doing it one way, when we're doing it the other, and when there's a potential crossover between the two ways of doing things, right? What rapid iteration looks like in a safe, high quality medical care provision environment, and that's what we're all kind of always aiming for in this setting. So another question that has come up is, as you're looking at patient recruitment, finding the right patients for the right trial study continues to be, a challenge across the board, even globally, right? What do you see as the future of kind of where that's going, how you get to the right patients at the right time? And what do you think are the barriers that we need to overcome for that? And maybe Miruna, if you want to go first, and then Doug.
Sure, happy to. So this is exactly the problem one of the problems we were trying to solve within clinical trial feasibility. So the first step to a clinical trial is, can we do it? Where can we do it? Do we have the right patients that would benefit? And how quickly can we pull it off, right? So that is the idea of recruiting patients through data is an incredibly valuable use case as well. So data, again, can help in this regard. The tricky part, and I think we talked about how challenging it is to structure that data. One thing you need to know is, in order for us to find those patients in real time, especially as we talk about oncology, in real time for the period of time that they have to get on treatment and to be captured within that treatment period, right? That data, all the data has to be, worked through, made sense of, and cleaned very, very quickly, very quickly. And so that is still a challenge, partially because, as we mentioned before, structured fields and kind of pulling from doctors' notes can be challenging. So one of the ways to get to understand which clinical trial patients should be enrolled is we look at these large databases and we sort of say, okay, here are the inclusion and exclusion criteria of the clinical trial. Do we have patients that maybe match this criteria today that could go on to this type of clinical trial within the next, we find in oncology, on average, it's sort of 7 to 10 business days. That could go on to this trial within that period of time. And so we've done analysis, and there's a lot of work that's being done within life science companies to perform this type of feasibility ahead of time in these databases, and really try to enroll based on, or at least go out to different healthcare providers based on the data. But again, that kind of that real-time data curation, if you will, needs to be done in order for us to capture it within within the period of time when the patient has the ability to be enrolled and go on treatment. So that's a really important aspect, and that's been historically very difficult to do. But is being done little by little. We're sort of chipping away at that data curation problem through AI and machine learning, as well as natural language processing. So
Wonderful.
Doug, I'll hand it to you I'm sure you probably have a point of view too.
Doug, there are also a couple questions actually coming up for you. So I may trade directions just a little bit on you because there are some people asking about where you are bringing VENTRIFLO and what you are doing with the company. So, and I see that we're coming up on 12:30. So would you mind sharing a little bit about that? Because there are people interested in the company right now. Just curious as to what stage you're at and where you are.
Yeah, so we're in late stage development, scaling up, contract manufacturing for the blood pump and for the console that drives the blood pump. We are on track to submit for 510(k) clearance for up to 6 hours pediatric CPB, so not neonate, not adult, mid next year. Love to make it sooner if we could. Sure hope it's not longer. And there's a lot there. Our goals are to responsibly and safely get on to patients. And unlike a lot of other medical devices, when you have their blood flow in your system, there's no cutting corners, right? So we've done a lot. We've worked with folks at Cleveland Clinic and at Dartmouth in the preclinical setting and others. We have some great advisors from around, Mass General, Brigham and Women's, and so forth. But it's and it kind of ties back, if you'll let me for a moment, to answer part of the other question. Is all of these they're processes, they're not events, and it takes a team and to collaborate across the clinical, across health administration, engineering. And so it's both the blessing and the curse. I so enjoy being in other settings, if you will, than the engineering or the corporate setting because of the stimulation and the learning. But it's also an enormous challenge because it takes a lot of time to do that. But to get things happening on a reasonable time frame, if at all possible, it's a team-based effort of both companies, funders, clinicians, the institutions, and managing that balance of what's evidence-based / historical, what's innovation driving for the future to advance the cause. So,
I think that is the perfect way to think about this, really. Kirsten, you are right. We do need part 2. I can't believe we're at 12:30 already. We're going to have to bring these guys back. I will say, Doug, the way you talk about it, though, as a kind of team-based sport, if you will, is so essential, right? We not only need kind of the clinicians, the engineers, the scientists, but I do think that perhaps the newest kid on the team is the data standards person, right? I think the data scientists have been with us, Miruna, with their PhDs and doing the work for a long time. Some of the larger companies most certainly have thought ahead and had data scientists for large clinical trials. But I think now, to be swift and fast moving in some of the smaller companies as well, places like COTA are necessary for us to be able to say, how are we going to take this data? What are we doing with it? How are we processing, managing, cleaning, and making it relevant? And at the same time, for people like you, a CEO of a hardware company, you need to be able to have a team of people who say, here's what we're going to do, and here's the exact data that you need, because this is a small kid who didn't do anything to ask for this disease, who is now willing to try a new technology. Their parents are willing, their physicians are willing. But what data we get out of that and how we help people is just so very palpable in what you do. So this is exciting for all of us. I will say you should follow both Doug Vincent and Miruna Sasu on social media as well. Miruna did recently post a nice article in Stat News. There was biotech companies scrambled to find scientists to manage troves of data. And I thought that was great. Just that title tells you what's going on, which is we are scrambling to figure out how do we invite this newest group to the team, and how do we really look at data in a way that we make sure we don't hurt people, but we instead help people. Jen, I will give you last word since we're a little over time. Jen, you are muted.
Such a great conversation. Really delighted to have our audience with such great participation, great questions. I see there are some outstanding questions. I can take those offline and answer those. Thank you so much to the leadership from Maruna and Doug, and for joining us and sharing what you're doing with our audience members. And also Dr. Bhatt for joining us when she's so busy right now. So really delighted. As always, look for us next Tuesday. Be sure to follow us on all of our social media. And we'll see everyone next Tuesday. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.